am being joined today by Rachel Fang. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
So we are going to be chatting today, actually covering two of my favourite topics in one conversation, obviously marketing being part of it. But the other thing that I'm always really interested in is leadership and leadership styles and how you develop yourself as a leader. So that's what Rachel and I are going to be talking about today. How do you kind of set out on your journey as a marketer and over time kind of develop your leadership style and skills? Do you want to start, Rachel, maybe by just giving us a bit of an overview of yourself and kind of your career to date?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of feel that in my career to date, I've really had two main pillars. Pillar one has been working in creative agency side, and pillar two has really been working client side. And I feel that throughout my career, I've kind of ping-ponged between the two, understanding what it is to kind of service a client, to pitch for a client, and then understanding on the other side how to work within an organization and the nuances that come with operating internally as opposed to externally and doing that servicing aspect of things. And so I've kind of worked through that. I've got into a space where I feel that I really started out my career in a very FMCG strong area, quite B2C, but then I realized that it was a lot of B2B clients that I was picking up a little bit more of. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed areas where I was kind of seeking tech when data was, I guess, not necessarily say up and coming, but it became more prolific, and more part of our everyday lives where social media was up and coming. And so more data points were coming through as opposed to what you used to be able to rely on, which was, your traditional advertising with lesser data points. And so I found myself kind of seeking or leaning towards those areas that were more heavily in kind of like new tech or a more geekier version of advertising or marketing. And so I find that in the last 10 years, I've really chased a very heavily B2B space in new and emerging technologies and, the overall getting my hands in the overall creation to all aspects of marketing and what it takes for marketing to exist as a whole.
And throughout that time, or I should actually start with the question, when did you kind of start leading teams? When did that kind of become part of your career journey?
I think you kind of lead at every point of your career journey. I mean, I don't want to sound cliche about it to say that everyone's a leader. Everyone is a leader. But leading teams per se, I feel that it happened actually when I was in advertising, when I was working for a boutique advertising agency, and I was creative director, and I started to lead a team that was, that we had our own set of accounts and all that stuff. I feel that that's kind of when it really started to kick in that, hey, the stuff that you do does influence. You do have to lead. You do have to create guardrails. You do have to appropriately manage, and that sort of stuff. So I would say almost in like my late 20s, I felt that started to become a stronger, more relevant theme.
And was that a conscious decision for you? Did you always feel that that was going to be part of your career, that you wanted to have that aspect of a role?
No, I never ever thought, hey, I want to lead, or I want to be a leader. I just really wanted to create really good work. I'm one of those type A personalities where I have to do my best at everything, even if I don't know how to do it. So if I have to, I will fail forward, or I will foolishly have the guts to try it out, to kind of explore it. And so I just wanted to get good at whatever it was that I was doing. And as you get good at what you're doing, you start to be seen as a leader in a particular space because you do have the information and you can share. And that information can always kind of be passed down or passed on to other people to kind of elevate, everyone's understanding of, certain topics or operational styles, et cetera, and all of that sort of stuff. And so I kind of found that, that it wasn't something that I had intentionally decided on. I just kind of picked up on it as I progressed in my career.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's one that I often get asked of, in order to become more senior, is it a given that the only way to do that is to be a, quote unquote manager and kind of lead lead teams. So it does sometimes feel that people fall into, for want of a better phrase, into that type of role.
Yeah.
And maybe they didn't necessarily intend to it, but it kind of felt like the next step up, and then they're sort of on the ladder, and and away they go.
Yeah. Yeah,
As
I remember actually doing an exercise like that when I was at car sales, where we it was this four grid where we had to kind of identify people who were really talented at what they wanted, at what they did. But then on that was a shifting scale of their desire to actually lead.
mm,
And there were some people who were just absolutely brilliant, but they wanted to stay within their area, and they didn't necessarily have a desire to manage or to lead a team. And so kind of picking up on those things and kind of understanding where people are at in terms of the expertise and being good at what they do, and then branching out into the lateral of, being able to lead and manage. I think they're kind of separate but concurrent conversations that people kind of go through and have throughout their careers.
yeah, absolutely. And when you found yourself in that first sort of leadership role, Rachel, had you had any, I guess, kind of formal training in that space, or were you, as most people are, just kind of doing their best to make it up as they go along?
It's funny you mentioned that. The most formal training that I had to lead a team would probably hark back to the days that I was in school. And I was school captain of, embarrassingly, my 10th and bowling team. Um,
Nice.
I we were performing pretty well, and so we had kind of like a sports psychologist to train us in what it
Hmm.
was to amplify this leadership quality and style. And I would say that that's probably the only time I actually see formal training about it. Aside from that, it's basically, I kind of felt who you were as a person or how you operated as an individual that kind of put you in that spot of leadership and management.
Hmm. And how do you then continue to develop? Is it a case of, as I said before, slightly kind of making it up as you go along, and seeing what works, or do you kind of, I guess, look at people around you and kind of see how they're doing it? How did you approach it?
I reckon that I approach this in kind of like a three-pronged type of an environment. One, I'm ever curious. I'm constantly looking for inspiration. And so within that inspiration point, I kind of look at two areas. One, which is formal reading, going like just reading blogs, understanding how
Mm,
other people do it, learning and just consuming content out there. Another form of learning is the informal, of surrounding myself with people who I think, oh wow, you know, you're interesting. You maneuvered that situation in such a new way. I want to learn from that. And then surrounding yourself with those types of people, kind of learn by osmosis or interaction. You know, I feel that that's kind of the two main pillars: the informal and the formal side of things. And then of course there's the looking inward side, where you kind of assess who you are as a person and continuously test your boundaries as what you're comfortable with doing, um, and changing the way that you deliver work or changing the way that you interact with people, based on what feedback you're getting from the outside. So I kind of put it in those really three camps as to how you go through learning about leadership.
mm.
There's the informal stuff, there's the formal stuff, and then there's the, once you're looking outwards, to then look inwards and then test that and ping it against what you're experiencing.
It's a really nice way of thinking of it. And uh, more broadly, you mentioned the kind of looking at people around you, and kind of observing, and almost learning by osmosis in terms of how they're going about things. I do think personally it is one of the concerns that I have, particularly for people that are kind of earlier on in their career, perhaps are spending more time working from home.
Yeah,
Obviously flexibility is super important. I would never want to deny that, but then the flip side of just what you learn by being surrounded by other people, and
yeah,
listening to other people's conversations, and as you said, you might watch someone maneuver quite a challenging conversation and you just think, wow, I never would have approached it that way. That was amazing, and then you kind of stick that away in your memory banks for future reference. And I even just think back in my own career, if I hadn't have had that time with other people around me to kind of learn from them, I think I would have found it really, really hard.
Mm.
And I don't know, as I said, flexibility obviously very, very important, but I don't know that we've necessarily solved that problem in terms of
Mm.
learning from those around you.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that we've kind of nailed that one just yet. I agree with you.
Mm,
I think it's important, like you were just saying, flexibility is important, but being out there and rubbing shoulders with other people is also really important. I think it's about taking a very balanced look at
mm,
how people operate. I mean, at the end of the day, going through your career is really about interacting with people as well as doing the work. And sometimes, if you're not interacting well with a person, that becomes a barrier to doing the work. So you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember there used to be this person back in agency when I was working. He was the traffic manager for the studio, and every morning he would come in and say hi to everyone, of course. But I noticed after a period of time that once a week, thereabouts, he would take a different person out for coffee. As in just go, hey, do you want to grab a coffee? And they would go out. And he managed the studio so incredibly well. When we had clients breathing down our necks and we desperately needed to get jobs into the studio, because he had that relationship and that rapport with us, it became easier to have that negotiation. And I learned that from actually seeing him in action at the office, very early on in their career. Um, so yeah, definitely, like being able to watch people interact just from afar is definitely a very important way of learning. I mean, kids do it at school too.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
why not the same for us as adults?
Exactly, exactly. And like you said, it is obviously all about balance, but yeah, my own sort of personal feeling on it is that I'm not sure we've actually struck that balance yet. And I think we've perhaps inadvertently maybe, but forgotten some of those benefits of actually being in the office with other people and what we actually did gain from that. Not just that,
Yeah.
oh, it took me an hour to get there and if that's an hour I get back in my day, but yeah, all the kind of the little incidental things that kind of come along the way. I
Yeah,
think
especially,
sorry,
sorry,
go
you go.
ahead.
I was going to say, especially now in the days of like virtual meetings, right? When
Mm,
you attend a meeting, you're on.
yeah,
Then it's the in between moments of when you're not on, when you're outside of that meeting, what's your body language like, and everything else that kind of creates that whole narrative, that story. And I think that's what people are missing. When we work from home a lot, and we kind of turn our computer on and we turn our cameras on, we have that virtual meeting, we're on, we're in that meeting zone, we're in that mindset, that meeting agenda, but what happens when we turn it off? you
mm.
know what's in the white space, of our day? And I think that's also a really important part of how we interact with people.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the other thing, and it was one of the other pillars that you mentioned there, it probably feels like it's shifting a bit over time, just as there is more of a proliferation of content available to us, whether that's kind of reading or um, podcasts on leadership, and there's so many avenues for kind of I was going to call it self development or self work. I'm not sure that's necessarily the right phrase to use, but if you are a curious person, as you said, that there's so many avenues these days to actually find out more and kind of listen to different people and get their thoughts on things.
So many, like, I have an Audible credit. It's like a monthly subscription.
Mm,
I never go through all of my credits. But I find that, listening to books, reading blogs, coming across people's, snippet-sized posts on LinkedIn,
mm,
I kind of feel like there's so many more opportunities to be picking up this sort of stuff on a daily basis. And the best part about it is that when, like, the social media algorithms also help you out. you
yeah,
know, Retargeting is your worst nightmare or your best dream, because it serves you the most relevant stuff. And so if you are on that pathway to self improvement or awareness and all of that type of content, just, seeking out one or two pieces will then serve you up more suggestions to actually then broaden your scope or, the type of content that you come across. And I love that about learning today. You're no longer stuck with what you know to go look for, and that's just it. Now you get served up suggestions as, hey, you might like this, or this could be
Yeah.
relevant, which then opens up the scope for all of that content, which is amazing. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, so true. Moving on from, I guess, those kind of broader leadership themes, as a marketer specifically, and as a marketing leader specifically, there's an inbuilt challenge there, isn't there, of just the ever evolving landscape that is marketing.
Yeah.
How do you kind of keep abreast of what's going on there, and as a kind of a marketing leader specifically, feel that you're continuing to develop yourself?
So I think one of the best and richest environments to continue this learning is through like conferences.
Mm.
Because of like I remember the last conference that I attended was the B2B marketers conference last year. I think it was in October. And attending stuff like that kind of opens you up to this world of what everyone's talking about. But it also kind of forces the people who are presenting to go into a little bit of detail. And as a leader, I have to say, sometimes that's the embarrassing part of, interaction. You want to find out the detail as to how they're doing it and what they're doing. But as a professional yourself, sometimes you might be too self-conscious or too worried to ask.
Mm.
And at those events, they're kind of like put on show to kind of go, well, this is my secret sauce or thereabouts, And so you interact with them at that level where everyone's coming to the table with the intent of, revealing some stuff, and I think that interaction is really great. So for me, personally, one of my favorite things is to go to the conferences. Another thing is also just to kind of rely on my network, reaching out to them to have really honest and transparent conversations about where things are at. Some people might be more interested in learning about, marketing operations or data or technical stack. I'm not necessarily going to have the time or the inclination to constantly learning about that. So kind of leading out to my network to go, hey, what do you think about this? Or have you seen this lately? And, all of that sort of stuff, I think really helps. This
Yeah.
continuous learning. I mean, doctors do it, right?
Mm.
Every period of time, they have to go back to sit for their test to go, yeah, I'm current. I know what, what diseases there are and how they're being treated, etc. And they go through tests and whatever those things are called. I think, as marketers, we kind of need to stay abreast of all these things because the landscape is changing and hugely doing so.
And something that I've certainly observed over the years is that I think there is a real sense of, and it may be true in other professions as well, but there is a real sense of kind of community, I think, within marketing, and people are very happy to share their time and kind of share their experience and their thoughts with others. There is that real sense of, yeah, I guess kind of giving back to the community in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. I was I think it was by maybe Segment or Twilio. It was in my LinkedIn feed. Someone had written a book. My first role as a CMO, because they kind of wanted to share what journey they went on. I found that so fascinating. The fact that they put their learning into a book, to write about this stuff, was I that caught me, like, it caught my attention immediately, and I was like, oh, I want to read about your journey into this space, type of a thing. So yeah, I do echo what you just said, and that people are so willing to share and pay it forward.
Yeah, absolutely. What's things, and one of the topics that certainly comes up a lot at the moment, with senior marketers that I'm kind of talking to, and actually recently done another podcast on this specific question, but it's around kind of, how do you raise the profile of marketing within the organization? How do you effectively, market your marketing? It's kind
Yeah.
of that age old thing of, I speak to a lot of people who are looking to move on because the organization that they're in either doesn't understand and or doesn't value marketing. And there's that broader question then of, well, what do we do about that? You can't just kind of leave that festering. And I
Yeah.
think it's probably one of those things as well, as you become more senior in your marketing career, that becomes more of an important facet of your role. How do you have those broader conversations, those more perhaps commercial conversations that aren't marketing specific per se? Tell me about your experience with those types of conversations, Rachel, and that sort of, yeah, marketing your marketing, if you like.
I reckon marketers are one of the worst marketers of their own marketing work. Um,
Mm,
you're so focused in actually the doing of the work that you don't then spend the extra time to then market the work that you've just gotten. I mean, sometimes at a press, it's also difficult to get them to share the results as well. More broadly speaking, because you get the results and you go, all right, we need to tweak this, we need to do that. And then you go back into the campaign and you reuse and recycle and tweak what you're doing to get better results. Um, I found that really branching out and leaning on like, your peers, your leadership team has really been helpful forging those relationships. I find that I'm quite obsessed about this idea, CMO to CRO, where marketers are sitting at a very sweet spot in organizations these days because of the emergence of the operational and the analytical aspects of things. Marketers have been forced to kind of expand their know-how and increase their learning and the areas that they're proficient in. And I feel that because marketing sits at that sweet spot where you are talking to all the other departments, you're talking to, customer, you're talking to product, you're talking to finance, you're talking to legal. You kind of this linchpin that connects out to all of these different departments to then run your campaign. The same should be done in terms of influence. You should be reaching out, or I find that marketers do reach out in that space to kind of utilize those connections to then elevate where they are in the business because they do know quite a bit about what's going on because of the multiple areas and avenues that they do have to interact with these departments to make their own work sing and go out to market. So I think that marketers are very uniquely placed to kind of have more influential conversations and to be more significant leaders of businesses rather than kind of like just a supporting cast
mm.
as where we used to be, especially in this day and age where we have so much data coming through that marketing as a department also owns and also spearheads in the organization.
I really like that. I really like that terminology you just used. That that sounds really nice. Not to be a supporting cast member. That's good. Have you had that experience where you've been in an organisation for whatever reason just doesn't seem to quite understand actually what marketing is capable of and can actually bring to the table? Have you had that experience?
Most definitely, yes. I've had it a couple of times throughout my career, and it's been a learning curve. It's been frustrating because you want to be able to pick up your stuff and run,
Hmm.
and you realize that you need to bring everyone else on that. You need to take everyone else on that journey to help them see what you see, to get them just as excited and geared up about what you're excited and geared up about. And so there are a lot of situations and examples where you work in an organization where marketing isn't seen as a primary function. In fact, in some organizations, marketing isn't even part of like the C-suite. You
Mm.
know, it gets managed through maybe the COO or someone else. And then to have your message go through a couple of levels, not to say that they're not good at what to do,
Yeah.
but it is quite telling when you don't have a seat at the table. And having a seat at the table and having a voice at the table, I think is really important. And I definitely have been in those situations where, it's been an added exercise or an added requirement for you to actually do I wouldn't call it politics, but, the roadshow of what
Mm.
marketing is and what marketing does and where we want to get it to as an additional step on top of what you already have to achieve.
Yeah, and again totally agree with what you said. I think partly it's that sort of changing face of marketing over the years, and perhaps if I don't know, again, probably the wrong terminology, but perhaps a more traditional organization where they haven't sort of maybe moved forward with some of the changes in marketing, and might still have that vision of marketing as being a support function, as not really commercial in the way that they approach things, certainly not revenue generating. You know, they're just kind of over on the side, and we talk to them occasionally, and they send out
Yeah.
nice pretty pictures, or a nice, you know, a nice campaign, or something like that.
Yeah.
um
I think because of where we are in this day and age, where SaaS or software as a
mm,
service or like actual online digitally led products have become the norm, that's really been, I feel, the driving force for this. Previously, marketing was, below the line, above the line, TVCs, radios, billboards. You couldn't really get much data back from that,
mm,
you know. But these days, marketing owns a lot of the interaction platforms. It's no longer just a product that you're interacting with. It's, your social media page, your website. And because marketing is the facilitator or the manager behind all of these owned channels, um, marketing has shifted in that we now own a lot of that customer relationship, or the interaction points with the customer. And therefore, our position at the organization has been elevated and lifted, because we can now see how they're engaging with us, how our audience is growing directly on our own channels in real time. And I think having that direct access and ownership of those mediums has definitely elevated the role of marketing.
yeah, and I think, as well as you said, it's that if marketing is the kind of the voice of the customer, then that ultimately goes into everything, doesn't it? Because
Yeah,
if you're the one that truly understands the customer, and in many instances has the data points to back that up, then that totally changes, and, as you said, kind of elevates the level and type of conversations that you're having.
yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I was interested in, and we sort of touched on it before, actually, with the point of marketers not always being in the exec leadership team. Why do you think, sort of historically, that we've seen so few marketers go on to become CEOs? It's quite unusual that the CMO is the one that steps up to become the CEO. Why do you think that is, and what are your hopes for the future there?
I can't really tell what it is, because I think marketers have traditionally not had the same clout and scope as
Mm,
other leaders in the organization, where laterally they're not across as many things. But like I said, as we've transitioned to a space where a lot of it is digitally led, a lot of products are online. These days, you see marketing hold a lot of product. You see marketing hold sales in some instances. You see marketing hold customer service, and because all of these previously separate departments have in some organizations started to come under the wing of marketing, marketing's umbrella has grown significantly. And because marketing's umbrella has grown significantly, it now places, we're in a new day and age where it places marketing at a different level, at a different scope, to be able to be sitting in the CEO role eventually. I think maybe marketers weren't as financially savvy or data savvy
mm.
or operationally savvy or customer savvy as we are today. I think that landscape has certainly changed quite a bit. My hope is that more marketers actually take it up to CEO roles, because then we are truly doing what we're saying we're doing in terms of putting the customer at the heart of what we do. And I think that's obviously a very important narrative to unpack a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And one would hope over the next, I was going to say 5 to 10, maybe that's slightly optimistic, 10, 5 to 10, I'll stick with it, 5 to 10 plus, that sort of
Short range.
evolution. Yeah, exactly. That sort of evolution will happen, that real kind of more commercial, kind of broader, customer focused, revenue generating kind of approach will ultimately lead in that direction. You are
Yeah,
starting to see it more, but certainly not to the same degree as, I don't know, traditionally maybe like a CFO or COO or something like that.
I think that there's certainly areas that marketers can't step into. You know, the CFO roles, obviously, they're a breed on their own. But from a marketing operations perspective, from understanding the business, from understanding the product, from understanding how the revenue flows through, from supporting your sales team, from developing your go-to-market, all of those assets kind of stack up and create like this big behemoth, like how do I phrase this? All of these things kind of contribute to how in depth or all of the connections a marketer has into a company, which then now puts them in a better position to be overall CEO.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking before in terms of some of those kind of informal learning points of just kind of observing other people around you. Have you ever I guess kind of taken that one stage further and either been for someone else or had your own mentor? Have you had that more slightly formalized kind of relationship like that?
Yeah, I think I have. Like there were more normally when you come to like slightly bigger organizations, they will have formal programs around this
Mm,
sort of stuff where as a leader you'll get picked to mentor someone, and likewise you can choose to be mentored by someone in the C-suite or someone else within the organization. I was definitely part of that program when I was in one of my previous companies, and I really enjoyed that. And I kind of feel that even before I was part of that program, I made some very strong connections with, people who I used to work with in other lives,
mm,
where we just kept in touch, and we were always keeping in touch to kind of find out how they were going, or to talk about, challenges that they might be facing, to get a different perspective on things. So I wouldn't necessarily say it got formalized, those relationships got formalized, but it was very clear that, whenever we chatted very specifically about career development or work, and all of those things. So
mm.
yeah, definitely. There are a lot of people who I've managed in my career who I still keep in touch with every now and then, to kind of play a bit of a mentorship type of a role, or even if it's not as formal as a mentorship, kind of as you're a fellow professional in
Hmm.
who works. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of think it's a little bit underutilized as a tool. I think there are, as you said, some organizations that do it really well and actually have those kind of formal steps in as part of their framework. And new person joins and they have the opportunity to have that kind of formalized mentoring relationship. But I don't know, just across across the years, across the numbers of people that I speak to, it does sort of seem quite underutilized. And I wonder why that is. Is it a case of people not wanting to
Getting too busy.
ask? Or, yeah, I mean, it was that as well. I mean, obviously, people are super busy. And is there that assumption that, if I'm asking someone for, I don't know, an hour a month, that's perhaps an imposition, or that I don't want to ask because the person might say no. Um, yeah,
I think it's
it's an
a
interesting one. I think it's one of those things that more people should probably do and probably utilize. You don't always have to try and figure everything out on your own. You can,
yeah.
utilize the experience and the knowledge of someone who's been there, done that, bought the t-shirt and can probably offer some really useful guidance. Um,
Yeah, that theme of paying it forward? I kind of
yeah,
feel that it's
yeah.
like, cast your mind back to like maybe, 15, 20 years ago. It wasn't such a huge thing. I find, at least I certainly wasn't aware of it. This whole idea of paying it forward career wise,
Hmm.
you know, and then looking at where we are today, I kind of feel that it's become more of a externalized outward topic that people are feeling more comfortable with. And I think we're the needle is moving a little bit on that, where people feel more comfortable to ask. or informally keep in touch with others so that they can, constantly keep them within their network. But I definitely think that we are in a completely different landscape when it comes to this sort of stuff. Like, 20 years ago, we didn't have things like LinkedIn. If you looked for a job, you were probably going onto, a classified job searching website, or, hopefully networking with previous recruiters that you got in touch with. These days, you go into LinkedIn and there's so many people within your network who you've never even, come across. They probably just seek you out from the title, from the place that you've worked at, and you become a connection. I think that change in our environment has facilitated how we network today, and that in turn is changing your access to the people whom you can get advice from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, obviously I'm a recruiter, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn takes a lot of stick, some of it fair enough. But I think there is an enormous amount of value when it's actually used properly as a genuine networking tool, to have
Yeah,
access to the range of people in different organizations, different levels. And again, it's actually often a piece of advice that I give to candidates sometimes when they're like, oh, I'm thinking of going in this direction, or I'd maybe like to upskill in this particular area. And of course, I'm always happy to give my own advice wherever I can, but I'm not a marketer. So one of the things that I often suggest to them is, use LinkedIn. Use the profiles, look people up, look at their skills, look at how they've built their careers. And if you feel there's a synergy there, send someone a message, ask if you can buy them a coffee, and
yeah,
maybe pick their brains on how they built their careers, or kind of learnt certain skills. And in my experience, people are, generally speaking, pretty open to that. And going back to your paying it forward comment earlier, that they're generally pretty open to having a coffee and trying to help someone else, and kind of share some advice. And I personally feel that, yeah, there should just be a bit more of that.
yeah.
And
Oh,
maybe it is a busyness thing, everyone's kind of pushed for time, but I think if we all did more of that, it would be, we'd be in a better place.
absolutely. I think just, asking the questions is a starting point. In one of my previous roles, I was speaking to my head of product, and I was saying to her, I was quite transparent about, I kind of said, I'm struggling a little bit in this space. I really wish I had an insider's view on, piece of software A and piece of software B, so that I could make a more informed decision as to what I wanted to make the marketing tech stack like. And she said, "Oh, I used to work with someone at such and such, and they use those two pieces of software together." She was like, "Do you want me to put you in touch with her?" And I was like, "Oh my God, yes, please."
Yeah.
And so then she did a warm introduction. I then got in touch with Alison Moser, who I eventually sat on a panel with for Asana later down, actually this last year. And we had the most fascinating and amazing conversation, which kind of like sparked up a bit of a friendship. I kind of feel like a professional friendship.
Hmm.
And, every time I've seen her since then, we've always come back to the, so how are you going with that? How are you working out the nuts and bolts of this? And she's come to share it very freely and openly with me. And I have in turn kind of shared that exact same, from my perspective, the exact same things with her. And I feel that creating friends in the industry, and networking in that way has been so amazingly helpful. That's just one instance. There are so many more where, simple things where, my GM of commercial at Parcel, I kept in touch with her over the years. She's one of my best workmates, and I learned so much from her, from understanding how the sales team tick, how they structure their go-to-markets, what they look for. I'm at, it's just this constant learning environment, and having people outside of the business that you're currently working in to have those conversations really helps change the dimension of what you talk about and what you learn.
Absolutely. And goes back to the word that you used before, which I think is so key, is curiosity.
Excuse
Bless
me.
you. Of curiosity, and I think that that just kind of curious nature can actually carry you a really long way. Just in terms of, I wonder how this works. I wonder, I wonder if this person would be open to a coffee. I wonder, what I might learn from X, Y, and Z person, X, Y, and Z book. Just
Yeah,
there's so much out there if you're open to, and maybe it also comes back to a sense of um vulnerability in its most positive meaning of knowing that we don't know everything. You can't
oh
know
my god,
everything. You're not
can't.
you're not going to have all of the answers, and kind of putting yourself out there in that slightly vulnerable way of reaching out to someone, saying, as your example there, I'm actually struggling, would you be able to help me with this? It's a very rare person that's going to say no in that scenario, and you've just opened up a really kind of meaningful conversation, which you
Yeah,
A, learn from, and B, probably saved yourself an enormous amount of time and kind of heartache to get to an answer more quickly.
yeah. I think there's a lot in that. I kind of feel that I grew up in Singapore, and I've gone through a bit of an evolution in being a manager and being a leader. I used to think that I showed up at work and there was my private side, sorry, my work side, but and my work and private were very far separated from each other. That they were separated by like a 10-foot pole, going both ways. Never could two ever touch and meet. Never would my worlds collide. And I realized that didn't. I don't want to sound cliche here, but that didn't allow me to live authentically.
Mm,
To really show up. And I found that as I broke those barriers down, my curiosity kind of took over, that vulnerability kind of entered, and a little bit of maybe pride started to come down a bit as well, in that it didn't have to be so prideful as to being that perfectionist all the time. And as I went through the evolution, I found that I was having much more meaningful conversations where I could actually just openly say, you know, I really want to find out more about this, and people
mm,
be so willing to share. And I love that about, human interaction, which, back to your earlier point about, being physically there in the office,
yeah.
creating those interaction points, is so important as well as obviously having the flexibility in your own time to do what you need to do.
Yeah, I went through that same thing as well. I remember certainly early on in my career, and if I'm honest, probably up till even kind of 5 or 6 years ago, I did still have this sense of work me and
Yeah.
actual me.
Yeah.
And there were elements that were the same, but work me wasn't 100% me. It was the kind of professional version of me that,
Yeah.
conducted themselves in the way that I thought was appropriate, but without actually being 100% me. And I think it is that sense of people do connect at that genuine level when they can see that you're being genuine, and you can have a much more meaningful, deeper conversation, I think, um and learn in the ways that we've already discussed.
Yeah, absolutely.
What advice would you give to someone, Rachel, because you've actually probably covered a lot of it, but maybe just to kind of summarize, what advice would you give to someone who's looking to kind of progress in their career, and perhaps develop their leadership skills, and um how would you suggest they go about that?
Um, I don't know. In like off the top of my head, I kind of feel that probably two things. One, to be honest with yourself, and two, to be open with the people around you. I think when I think they I know there's an element of politics there. It's almost quite naive to say, yeah, be open about, the fact that you want to be leadership and manager, etc. Some people might actually cut you down, and go, well, no, that's my space and I need to protect that, you know. Um, but I think being honest with yourself and being open about, where you want to go, I think you will find a lot of people in your organization, in your career, who will want to help you out. And I think being honest with yourself as to where you really are, and to find out which areas you need to brush up on, to be curious is going to help you. Um, it's it's really disappointing to go, I want to be a leader, and to be have been falsely puffed up or understand or think that you're at a certain level, um, and then start on that journey. To be honest with yourself and to truly go, where am I? And maybe even speak to people who
Mm.
you have close relationships with to go, this is what I'm thinking, where I want to go. What's your, what's your take on that? Can you give me some feedback? That feedback is going to be a gift to help you then present to you a version of how people see you on the outside and how you see yourself, and to find a calibration point in the middle that allows you to kind of understand what your environment is like and the areas that you kind of need to work on. So I'd like to think that, for anyone looking to step up, to want to chase leadership, management, all of that sort of stuff, be curious and honest with yourself, but also be open with, the people who you can trust around you to go to provide you with that feedback and provide you with that support as well.
Mm, I think that's a really key point, and quite often, have conversations with people and they're looking for a new role, and they want to kind of take that next step up, and often they haven't necessarily looked for that opportunity in their current organization. They assume that, oh, if I want to take the next step, then I need to leave, I need to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's always the case. I mean,
No.
maybe the structure in your current organization maybe doesn't allow, that's a different scenario, but in most organizations, if you are having that open and honest dialogue with whether it's an HR manager or your immediate manager, to say, I would really like to take the next step, I would like to develop in X, Y, and Z areas, you would hope that most organizations, maybe depending on their size, but would have those opportunities for you. And I think quite often people miss that step, and they just
Yeah.
think, oh, I'm ready for the next role, I'm going to leave.
Mm.
And there's
You know,
probably learnings on both sides there, isn't there, for the individual and maybe for the organization as well.
absolutely. I recently, in my team, had a designer, so smart, so amazing what she did. And, she very openly had the conversation with me to go, I want to step up. And I was like, all right, let's do it. All right, let's have a very honest conversation about where you're right now and what you need to do. And so then I could have just developed this on myself. I went to, a PNC team and said, such and such wants to step up. She is amazing in these particular areas. Can we write up a competency framework so that we can kind of assess the situation at hand and understand which areas she needs to go in to actually get to this next stage? And creating that structure around it, not just made that person feel seen and feel as if you're working on it, but that's essentially what Imagine needs to do. It's not just about the work, it's about helping to facilitate the growth of the people in your team. And what you said about you don't have to go outside to take that step up, that's a big one. Had she not come to me and said, I feel that I'm ready for more, I want to step up, I want to do this, etc., I would have never known. And then the next thing I would have received was probably a resignation because they found themselves another job. Instead, you want to be able to hold on to the IT because they're so amazing. You want to be able to build on your learning. And there's no better place to do it than in the current place that you are in, because you have all that IP already, as opposed to going someplace new and starting from scratch, and building up that rapport and, showing people what you can do. You can stay where you are to kind of build on top of that. And utilize the network around you that you've already created, as to going into a new situation completely fresh and green.
Yeah, so true. Final question, Rachel. It's always the final question here on the podcast. What do you know now that you wish you knew then?
Wow, I feel like I've grown and learned a lot. So there's lots in there.
It's a fairly broad, ambiguous question, isn't it?
It is. I feel that what I know now, and this is probably very timely for me and my team and in my growth, is that I feel that no matter what environment you're in, be true to yourself. If you're being true to yourself, you are putting yourself in the best environment to grow. But if you're not, and you're kind of shortchanging your potential for the future. So not just be true to yourself in the moment, but be true to yourself, as you plan, as you look back, previously when I had this aspect of me, which was private me and, public me or work me, I don't think I was true to myself. And so I think there are a lot of attributes that I had in my personal life that I've now brought into my work life that have really helped me facilitate a lot of relationships. That's when I wasn't being true to myself. I think today I approach that much more authentically. You don't have to show up and be someone who you're not really. It's okay to explore who you are out in the open as well.
Nice. I like that answer, and that's a very, very nice way to end. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your thoughts and experience, and yeah, really, really enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I loved it.